So now that I covered the original Space Jam in all of its glory, I think now it's about time to talk about the long-awaited sequel that has kind of taken the internet by storm. As I mentioned in the previous review of the original movie, I think Space Jam is one of the most fascinating movies to ever exist. And I was honestly kind of excited for the sequel for very similar reasons. I do love the original movie, and was hoping that this sequel would fulfill my expectations of what I would like and expect from something as surreal as a sequel to Space Jam, of all things. So, after 25 years and all the stuff being discussed around this movie, is Space Jam: A New Legacy any good? Well, I have to say, this is one anomaly of a movie that's absolutely insane, and one that I can't believe what I'm seeing half of the time, and totally understand if people have that issue as well. This might be one of the most strangest and unbelievable movies I have ever seen, and yet I kinda dug it actually. I noticed that this movie has been a hot topic for quite some time, and like a lot of revivals to classic franchises, this one has gotten a huge backlash from a lot of longtime fans. As someone who's also been a huge fan of the Looney Tunes and Space Jam, I'm not quite in that category, but I'd be lying if I say this movie was actually really good. While I don't think this movie is necessarily that good objectively speaking, I'm also putting it into consideration how the first movie was, which even most fans can admit is a huge guilty pleasure of a movie. While I do love the first Space Jam, it's hard to really call it a movie that is good, even if there are a lot of elements in the original movie that are likable and well done. It's a movie that's definitely a product of its time, and one that is written as a corporate product film. That, for a lot of people, even myself who love the first movie, tend to acknowledge that it might not be the best film out there, even if in our hearts it might be a 10 out of 10 masterpiece. This sequel, I would say, is kind of the same, with a lot of strengths and weaknesses that can be said about the original, along with some things that can't really be said about the original that also applies to this movie. I don't want to go any further without spoiling anything, so consider this a spoiler review. If you don't care about spoilers or already seen the movie, I'll at least say a quick sum up of what I thought before I go any further. I recommend this movie. It's not really a great movie, but it's such an anomaly like the first one, it has to be seen to be believed. So I do recommend checking it out. So take it for what it's worth. Let's get on to what really made Space Jam 2 an anomaly, with spoilers. Starting with the first thing to know, we get an appearance by the man of the hour, our true lord and savior, of course, Big Chungus.
I'm hunting rabbits.
With that in mind, Space Jam 2 is also a very trendy movie in its own right. But to the film's credit, there are plenty of things I can easily say are good about this movie. Much like the first movie, the strongest element of Space Jam 2 is by far the animation, which this was honestly really exciting to see. I do kind of miss the shadows that added some dimensions to the characters in the first Space Jam. However, it's not a big deal here because the movie is so vibrant and expressive with its animation, it more than makes up for it. There's a ton of animation here, much more than the film advertised, and seeing the Looney Tunes back in a big screen adventure while still retaining their animated selves was really awesome to see. Even in CGI, I thought they looked decent for the most part. There were definitely some shots they looked a bit odd, and it's weird seeing some of these designs with more texture to them, but they still retain that cartoony movement that I love so much, and you can definitely do worse with this kind of thing too. Plus, in terms of strengths of this movie, something I say actually improves upon the original Space Jam is how the Looney Tunes are integrated in the plot this time around. It does start out similarly to the first movie with a flashback to the lead's childhood, yet the first movie never gave any sort of indication that the Looney Tunes were involved in the beginning, which made the whole crossover a lot more jarring once you get there, especially for someone who might not have seen or heard of Space Jam before watching it. Really, the only thing that's odd about it here is the fact that they reference Bugs Bunny's crazy castle of all things. Plus, even taking all of that stuff out of it, Michael Jordan really didn't seem to care all that much in the original movie. He doesn't really seem like he's in it for anything, and doesn't seem excited at all to be playing a basketball game with the Looney Tunes. Space Jam 2, on the other hand, does a good job establishing that LeBron does like the Looney Tunes, with him playing a Bugs Bunny video game. Now that already sets up the movie better because it's already letting us know early on that Bugs Bunny is going to be involved with this. And once LeBron gets to the Toon world, he becomes legitimately excited that he meet all these characters. It proves to me that LeBron wasn't it more because he actually likes the Looney Tunes and seems to be a fan of them, or Jordan just seems to do it because, hey, his kids like the Looney Tunes, but he doesn't really seem to care about cartoons otherwise. Now, this might mean that LeBron is a better actor than Jordan, right? Well, kind of. He definitely does a better job than Jordan because James is at least trying in this movie, but he ends up sort of having the opposite problem to Michael Jordan. LeBron James overacts a lot compared to Jordan, which does come across a bit phony, even when he's voice acting. It's a better performance due to how James is expressing more emotion, but he might have gone overboard in a few parts. There's also Don Cheadle in this movie, who is arguably not that great, objectively speaking, performance-wise, but I can't say I don't think he's having a little bit of fun in this role. He plays as over-the-top of a villain as you can expect with this kind of movie, and I say he does a decent job hamming it up for this type of role. And of course, a lot of the really popular Looney Tunes are here, and pretty much all of them do have a couple of fun and enjoyable moments. And most of them don't do anything too out of character. In fact, some scenarios, they get pretty fitting if you know the likes of Daffy, Porky, and the others. Lola Bunny appears again, and she's okay. She doesn't stand out that much as a character here outside of being the strong female protagonist. Although the Wonder Woman sequence she was a part of was one of the highlights of this movie for sure. She serves her purpose fine here, but I'll address two things that have been talked about with her. One is the voice acting, which Zendaya, she does fine, but it does lead to an unfortunate precedent that voice actors can't sell a movie as well as bigger stars, according to studio's executives. It's so weird that Zendaya is a big name being addressed as a voice actress when they really should have kept it as not mentioning the voice actors at all regardless of fame, or given the voice actors credit as they should. It is something that I definitely think needs to be fixed later on. Oh, and the other major thing she has that is getting talked about is her design, which I personally don't think is an issue because she looks the fucking same. Like, it's the same character. She's not a different color, she's not fat. All she has is just a different outfit. I have seen Sonic redesigns that were more drastic in this, so who the hell cares? And, while on the topic of criticisms, I have seen a ton of disdain for Space Jam 2 for how this movie is an advertisement for Warner Brothers and focuses on a lot of Warner Brothers property. Now, I do acknowledge that, yes, this is definitely a way for WB to promote themselves, and it's super self-indulgent about it. Probably more self-indulgent than the Snyder Cut, and that's saying something. However, I have to admit, I think these complaints about them doing this movie as a Warner Brothers promo is a bit excessive for a few reasons. Namely, looking at the first Space Jam, it was also an advertisement. I mean, it's a movie literally based on commercials. So the whole sellout sort of mentality was not a new feeling in Space Jam 2, so I don't see it as this huge insult to the original movie. I understand maybe liking the original movie more due to its focus on sports and it being a more simple movie at its core. But the whole acting like the original movie was a flawless masterpiece and complaining about the new one being an advertisement when the original was that as well is something I honestly can't get behind that well. But even taking the original Space Jam out of it, everyone acts like this is completely foreign and confused on what audience it's for because of all the constant references to Warner Brothers properties. To which I reply with, dude, Looney Tunes has been doing this kind of stuff for years now. The Looney Tunes have always been known for making pop culture references and parodying other Warner Brothers properties, and I didn't hear anyone complaining back then. This isn't the first time Warner Brothers has parodied DC in some capacity. And some of the movies they parody here make a little bit of sense. I understand people not liking the Matrix reference since it's so overdone, but stuff like Yosemite Sam being Sam on the piano in Casablanca, Elmer Fudd being Mini-Me, do work as quick little gags that have some thought given into its characters. Hell, Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner and Mad Max, that works perfectly given these characters. And to everyone who complains that, oh, why is Space Jam making references? The movie's not made for kids. Again, Looney Tunes has done this kind of stuff since the early days, including the original Space Jam. Like, you mean to tell me that you're watching Looney Tunes as a kid and you understood every single reference they told back then?
Say, pardon me, but could you help out a fellow American who's down on his luck?
Hit the road!
Exactly. So this really isn't all that big of a deal. In fact, if anything, it's making me think that this kind of stuff makes Space Jam more like Kingdom Hearts than it already is, which is the kind of direction I felt a Space Jam sequel could have gone to become a bigger, crazier movie. Now, with all those defenses I made against Space Jam 2, and how I felt this stuff kind of worked for something like a sequel to Space Jam, that probably means I love this movie, right?
Did you just say, please, Dad, dab?
No, I said please.
Dab.
Yeah, not quite in love. While I do think there are some criticisms that are a little too excessive and extreme, I also think there are some critiques this movie have that are justifiable. My main issue with this movie comes at a lot of the dialogue. It didn't quite ruin it for me, since the film has enough energy and insanity to it where I found a lot of entertainment out of it. Though to say this movie is perfect or even a well done movie is kind of hard for me to say when this film has quite a few moments, maybe too many, even for Space Jam standards, that are either jokes that aren't fleshed out all that well, or modern jokes in the worst kind of ways. Like, jokes that felt like a grandparent trying to be cool to their kids kind of joke.
Haters gonna hate.
While I do ultimately like this movie, I can't ignore some of these aspects of this movie that are cringe. I mean, I was still laughing at some of these moments, but honestly, not quite for the reason I should have been laughing at.
Show 'em who you really are, notorious P.I.G.
This is borderline experimental.
Another downside with Space Jam 2 for me that is considerably weaker than the first is definitely the soundtrack. Not to say that New Legacy soundtrack is awful, I've definitely heard worse, and there are some songs here that I do enjoy and find fairly fitting for Space Jam as a whole. But let's be real, the soundtrack has nothing on the hype that is the original Space Jam soundtrack. Like, for as decent as the animation in the opening credits is in this movie, it has nothing on the hype factor that is hearing the original Space Jam theme during those credits, which this movie definitely would have benefited from. Plus, one last bad thing I will mention that is bad and something I want WB to do is to definitely credit their artists for the work on the film, as some people, for whatever reason, weren't credited on this movie despite the fact that they worked on it. Not cool, Warner Brothers. Not cool. The animation is the best thing about this movie by far, and I definitely don't think it's a good look when the people who helped with the best aspect of this movie aren't even given credit that they deserve. Treat your animators with respect, especially when they make this movie significantly better. So, as a whole, I found Space Jam 2 to ultimately be entertaining. Is it an amazing comeback to the Looney Tunes that's every bit as good as something like the Lego Movie? No, not even close. But I also can't find this movie to be a disaster either. I get the whole idea of hating a movie when it's something that's truly disrespectful to its franchise and doesn't even give the bare minimum when it comes to giving us a potentially entertaining film. This at least had energy, has some creativity put into it, and at least in my opinion, is a proper sequel to something like Space Jam. Is it better than the original movie? Hard to say, because I do love the aspects of it being a crazy over-the-top crossover in the vein of Kingdom Hearts, but definitely acknowledge and appreciate the simplicity that the original had more of. Though to say both of these movies are truly great, I can't really say. But at the same time, both Space Jams definitely have a creativity and passion to them that I do enjoy. Granted, they're still overtly marketed movies, made for money kind of movies, but at least they're ones that had some effort put into them. They're movies that, despite some of their more pandery moments, they have this weird charm and energy that I can see even as a product. Most people in this put in their all and did the best with what they can do. These movies showcase some enjoyment and entertainment value. While ultimately simple to expect, they're ones that are worth witnessing for the pure insanity of seeing these kind of weird, crazy movies that come into fruition. That's hard not to ignore. Space Jam 2 does exactly what I wanted and expected from it. It may not be for everyone, but I'm glad that for a strange product like this, it's a movie that I managed to get some mileage out of witnessing it. So take that for what it's worth. I'm giving Space Jam 2 a 6 out of 10. Check it out if you really want to. Sure.